27 hours after my daughter's wedding, I found myself staring down the barrel of the most calculated betrayal I'd ever experienced in my 63 years on this earth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a man who built everything from nothing watched it all crumble in the hands of someone he trusted like a son. Before I go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching this from. I want to know how far the story travels, because what happened to me could happen to anyone anywhere. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Hit that subscribe button now, because you're about to hear something that'll make you question everyone you trust. My name is Robert Castellano, and for 42 years, I built a construction empire in Denver, Colorado. Started with nothing but calloused hands and a beat-up pickup truck. By the time I was 55, I owned 12 properties across the metro area, employed 63 people, and had enough money to retire comfortably. The crown jewel was my home, a 4,000-square-foot custom-built house on 3 acres in Cherry Hills Village, worth just north of $2 million. I designed every room myself, poured the foundation with my own crew, and watched my late wife Margaret pick out every single fixture. Margaret died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer took her in 4 months, and with her went the light of my life. Our only child, Sarah, was 28 then, working as a marketing coordinator in downtown Denver, living in a cramped apartment, and struggling with her own grief. After the funeral, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I asked Sarah to move back home. She was hesitant at first. Independent to a fault, just like her mother. But I was drowning in that big house, surrounded by memories and emptiness, and I needed my daughter close. So I sweetened the deal. I told her she could live there rent-free, help her pay off her student loans, and when I died, the house would be hers anyway. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. For 8 months it was. Sarah and I had dinner together most nights, watched old movies on weekends, and slowly began healing from Margaret's loss. Then she met Bradley Morrison. Bradley was 29, tall and lean with dark hair and the kind of smile that made people trust him instantly. He worked in commercial real estate, drove a leased BMW, and wore suits that cost more than most people made in a week. Sarah brought him home for dinner on a Tuesday in March, and I could see she was completely smitten. I wanted to like him. God knows I tried. But something about Bradley Morrison made my skin crawl from day one. Maybe it was the way his eyes moved around my dining room, cataloging everything like an appraiser. Maybe it was how he asked detailed questions about my properties, my business, my retirement plans. Maybe it was the way he'd compliment my house just a little too enthusiastically, making comments about the incredible investment potential and the prime location. But Sarah was happier than I'd seen her since her mother died, and I wasn't about to ruin that by voicing suspicions I couldn't quite articulate. So I kept my mouth shut and tried to be the welcoming father-in-law. Bradley started spending more and more time at the house. First it was weekend visits, then he was there 3 nights a week, then he essentially moved in without any formal conversation. He was charming, I'll give him that. He'd help with yard work, bring expensive wine to dinner, and always complimented my cooking. He seemed genuinely interested in my stories about the construction business, asking thoughtful questions about building codes, zoning laws, and property development. Looking back now, I realize he was studying me like a textbook. 6 months into their relationship, Bradley proposed. It was elaborate and expensive, a private dinner at the Denver Art Museum, photographer hidden in the wings, ring that probably cost $15,000. Sarah called me from the museum bathroom, crying happy tears, begging me to drive down and celebrate with them. I did, because she was my daughter, and her happiness was everything to me. But as I watched Bradley that night, saw how his hand lingered on Sarah's back while his eyes scanned the room, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't love. This was something else entirely. The engagement period was a whirlwind. Bradley insisted on a short timeline, just 4 months to plan the wedding. He said he didn't want to wait to start their life together, that he'd waited 29 years to find the right woman and didn't want to waste another minute. Sarah ate it up. She was planning the wedding of her dreams, and Bradley spared no expense. The venue alone cost $18,000. During those 4 months, I watched Bradley integrate himself deeper into our lives. He started handling some of Sarah's finances, said he wanted to help her get organized for their marriage. He offered to help me with paperwork when I mentioned struggling with some property management issues. He even suggested I might want to think about simplifying my holdings as I got older, maybe consolidating assets to make things easier for Sarah to inherit someday. At the time, his suggestions seemed thoughtful. Caring, even. The week before the wedding, Bradley asked if we could have a private conversation. We sat in my study, surrounded by the books Margaret had collected over the years, and he looked me straight in the eye. He said he loved Sarah more than anything in the world. He said he wanted to take care of her for the rest of their lives, but he was worried about their financial future. His real estate career was going well, but not well enough to provide the kind of security Sarah deserved. He wondered if there might be a way for him to get more involved in managing my properties, maybe learn the business from me, create something they could build on together. I was touched. Here was a young man who wanted to work for what he got, who wanted to learn from me, who was thinking about my daughter's future. I told him we'd talk more after the honeymoon, that I'd be happy to teach him what I knew. He thanked me, shook my hand, and looked me right in the eye when he said he felt blessed to be joining our family. 3 days later, they were married. The wedding was beautiful. Sarah looked radiant in her grandmother's dress, which we'd had altered to fit perfectly. Bradley looked handsome in his tuxedo, and when they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I walked my daughter down the aisle, gave her away to the man she loved, and felt genuinely happy for the first time since Margaret died. The reception was perfect. Bradley's best man gave a speech about how lucky Sarah was to have found someone who loved her so completely. Sarah's maid of honor talked about how Bradley had brought light back into Sarah's life after her mother's death. When it was my turn to speak, I welcomed Bradley to our family and said I couldn't imagine a better husband for my daughter. I meant every word. The next morning, they left for their honeymoon in Maui. 2 weeks on the beach, staying at a resort that cost more per night than most people made in a week. I kissed Sarah goodbye at the airport, hugged my new son-in-law, and told them to have the time of their lives. I spent those 2 weeks alone in the house, making plans. I was thinking about how I could help Bradley get started in property management, maybe even eventually bringing him into the business as a partner. I was imagining grandchildren running through those rooms, carrying on what Margaret and I had built together. I had no idea that my new son-in-law had already made his own plans for my future. They were supposed to return on a Thursday. Instead, Bradley showed up at my door alone on Tuesday afternoon, 27 hours after their flight landed. He wasn't wearing vacation clothes. He was wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase, and he wasn't alone. Standing behind him was a woman I'd never seen before, holding a notary stamp and a stack of papers. That's when Bradley Morrison looked me in the eye and said the words that changed everything. "Robert, we just sold this house. You're moving to a retirement home." The first thing that went through my mind when Bradley spoke those words wasn't anger. It wasn't even shock. It was confusion so profound that for a moment, I wondered if I'd misheard him, or if this was some kind of elaborate joke. I looked past Bradley to the woman with the notary stamp, then back to my son-in-law's face, searching for any sign that this was anything other than what it appeared to be. His expression was calm, professional, almost bored. Like he was delivering a weather report. I said, "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Bradley stepped into my foyer without being invited, and the notary followed. He set his briefcase down on Margaret's antique console table, the one she'd inherited from her grandmother, and clicked it open with practiced efficiency. "I said we sold the house, Robert. The closing is scheduled for next Friday. I've already arranged for a very nice assisted living facility in Thornton, Sunrise Manor. They have an opening in their memory care unit." The words hit me like physical blows. Memory care unit. I was 63 years old, in perfect health, with a mind sharper than most people half my age. But as I stood there trying to process what was happening, I felt like my brain was full of cotton. "Where's Sarah?" I asked. Sarah's at the spa. She's having a difficult time with this transition, so we thought it would be better if I handled the paperwork. She'll come say goodbye before you move, of course. That's when the first wave of real fear hit me. Not fear of losing my house, not fear of being sent away, but fear that my daughter was part of this. That the little girl I'd raised, the woman I'd comforted after her mother's death, had somehow been turned against me. I must have swayed on my feet, because Bradley actually reached out to steady me. The concern in his voice sounded genuine when he said, "Robert, are you okay? Maybe you should sit down." I knocked his hand away. "Don't touch me. And don't call me Robert. You've lost that privilege." The notary, a small woman in her 50s with kind eyes, looked uncomfortable. She glanced between Bradley and me, clearly sensing something wasn't right. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, "perhaps we should wait for Mrs. Morrison to be present for this?" Bradley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That won't be necessary. I have power of attorney for all matters related to Robert's care." Power of attorney. The words echoed in my head as I tried to make sense of how this could be possible. I'd never signed any such document. I'd never even discussed it with anyone. "Show me," I said. Bradley pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed me a stack of papers. The top document was indeed a durable power of attorney, signed and notarized, giving Bradley Morrison complete authority over my financial and medical decisions. My signature was at the bottom, right where it should be. But I had never signed that document in my life. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand what I was looking at. The signature looked like mine. It was close enough that most people would never question it. But I knew my own handwriting, and this wasn't it. The loops were wrong, the slant was off, and the way I dotted my I's was completely different. "This is a forgery," I said. Bradley's expression didn't change. "Robert, I understand this is difficult. Change is hard at any age, but especially for someone in your condition. The doctors said confusion and denial are completely normal." "What doctors? What condition?" "I haven't seen a doctor in 2 years except for my annual physical, and I'm in perfect health." Bradley pulled another folder from his briefcase. This one contained what appeared to be medical records from 3 different physicians, documenting a progressive decline in my cognitive abilities over the past 18 months. According to these files, I'd been exhibiting signs of early-stage dementia, including memory loss, confusion, and periods of disorientation. The problem was, I'd never seen any of these doctors. I'd never been evaluated for dementia. These records were as fake as the power of attorney, but they looked absolutely authentic. Professional letterhead, detailed notes, even billing codes. I realized I was looking at the work of someone who understood exactly how to manipulate the system. "You son of a bitch," I said quietly. The notary took a step back. "Gentlemen, maybe I should come back another time." "No," Bradley said firmly. "Robert, I need you to sign these documents. The sale is contingent on your signature, and we can't afford any delays." He spread 5 different documents across Margaret's console table. A deed transfer, a sale agreement, a waiver of homestead exemption, and 2 others I couldn't immediately identify. Every signature line was marked with a yellow sticky note. I looked at the sale price on the agreement and felt my knees go weak. $850,000. My house was worth more than twice that, and Bradley was selling it for less than half its market value. "To who?" I asked. Bradley handed me a business card. Morrison Development LLC. He was selling my house to himself. The beautiful, calculated simplicity of it hit me all at once. Bradley hadn't just married my daughter for love. He'd married her to get access to me, to my assets, to my trust. He'd spent months studying my routines, my vulnerabilities, my relationships. He'd forged documents, created false medical records, and established a legal framework that would allow him to steal everything I'd worked 42 years to build. And he was going to make it look like he was doing it for my own good. "I'm not signing anything," I said. Bradley sighed like a parent dealing with a stubborn child. Robert, we've been through this. You don't have a choice. I have legal authority to make these decisions on your behalf. Based on forged documents. Based on legitimate medical evaluations and legal instruments that you signed of your own free will. I understand you don't remember signing them, but that's exactly why we need to get you proper care. I looked at the notary, who was clearly uncomfortable but seemed to accept Bradley's version of events. To her, this probably looked like a typical family situation, a caring son-in-law trying to help an elderly man who was losing his mental faculties. That's when I realized how truly screwed I was. Bradley hadn't just planned this theft, he'd planned it perfectly. He had official-looking documents, a plausible medical narrative, and legal authority that appeared completely legitimate. Even if I could prove the documents were forged, it would take time, and time was exactly what Bradley wasn't giving me. But I'd spent 4 decades in construction, dealing with con artists, fraudsters, and people who thought they could take advantage of an honest contractor. I'd learned a few things about fighting dirty along the way. I walked to the notary and looked her straight in the eye. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Linda Kowalski," she said. "Linda, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not mentally incompetent. I have never been evaluated for dementia. I did not sign that power of attorney, and I am being defrauded by this man. I am asking you, as a licensed notary public, to refuse to notarize any documents today and to report this situation to the appropriate authorities." Linda looked uncertain. "Sir, Mr. Morrison has provided all the necessary documentation. Documentation that can be verified," I said. "Right now. Call the doctors whose names are on those medical records. Call the attorney who supposedly witnessed my power of attorney signature. Make the calls right now, in front of me." Bradley's calm mask slipped just slightly. "That's not necessary, and frankly, Robert, this kind of paranoid behavior is exactly what the doctors warned us about." But Linda was already reaching for her phone. "Actually, Mr. Morrison, it's not unusual to verify documentation in situations like this. Let me just make a quick call." "Put the phone down," Bradley said, and for the first time, his voice carried real menace. Linda froze. I saw fear flash across her face, and I realized she was beginning to understand what she'd walked into. That's when I made the decision that would either save my life or end it. I looked at Bradley Morrison, the man who'd stolen my daughter's heart to steal my life's work, and I smiled. "You know what, Bradley? You're absolutely right. Let's get this paperwork done. But first, let's take a little drive." "What are you talking about?" "I'd like to go to the police station first. You know, just to make sure everything is properly documented. For my own peace of mind." The silence that followed was deafening. The moment I mentioned the police station, Bradley's entire demeanor changed. The carefully constructed mask of concerned son-in-law cracked, and for just a split second, I saw the real man underneath. Cold. Calculating. And very, very angry. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Linda saw it too. I could tell by the way she took another step backward and clutched her phone tighter. "Robert," Bradley said, forcing his voice back to that patronizing tone, "there's no need to involve the police. This is a family matter. Then you shouldn't have any problem with us making sure everything is legal and above board," I replied. "Linda, would you mind driving us to the station? I'd hate for there to be any questions later about whether proper procedures were followed." Linda nodded eagerly. "Of course. That's actually standard protocol for situations involving power of attorney transfers." It wasn't, but Bradley didn't know that, and Linda was smart enough to play along. Bradley's jaw tightened. "Fine. But I'm calling Sarah first. She needs to know her father is having an episode." "You do that," I said. "Call Sarah. Let's get her down to the station too. I'd love to hear what she has to say about all this." For a moment, I thought Bradley might refuse. I watched him weigh his options, probably trying to figure out if he could salvage his plan or if he needed to cut his losses and run. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed. "Sarah, honey, it's me. We have a problem." Your father is confused. He's insisting we go to the police station before we complete the paperwork. He's talking about forgery and fraud. He paused, listening. No, I think it's best if you meet us there. He needs to hear from you that this is all legitimate. He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been respect. She'll meet us at the station. The drive to the Denver Police District 6 station on Washington Street was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I sat in the back of Linda's Honda Accord, watching familiar neighborhoods go by, wondering if I was about to save my life or destroy it. If Sarah really was part of Bradley's plan, if she really had agreed to have me declared incompetent and shipped off to a memory care facility, then I was about to lose my daughter along with everything else. But I had to know the truth. The police station was a modern brick building that looked more like an office complex than what you'd expect from cop shows on TV. Linda parked in the visitor lot, and the three of us walked through the front doors together. Bradley had regained his composure and was back to playing the role of concerned family member. The desk sergeant was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes. Her nameplate read, Sergeant Martinez. How can I help you folks today? She asked. I stepped forward before Bradley could speak. Sergeant, I need to report an attempted fraud. This man is trying to force me to sign documents transferring ownership of my property based on forged power of attorney papers. Bradley immediately launched into his performance. Officer, I'm this man's son-in-law. He's been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, and we're trying to help him transition to appropriate care. He's become paranoid and confused about the legal arrangements we've made for his own protection. Sergeant Martinez looked between us, clearly trying to assess the situation. Do you have the documentation with you? Bradley pulled out his briefcase again and spread the papers across the counter. The power of attorney, the medical records, the sale documents, everything looked official and legitimate. But Sergeant Martinez was thorough. She examined each document carefully, making notes on a pad. When she got to the medical records, she frowned. These evaluations are from Dr. Patterson at Rose Medical Center? That's correct, Bradley said. And Dr. Chen at Presbyterian St. Joseph? Yes. Sergeant Martinez picked up her phone and dialed a number. Hi, this is Sergeant Martinez with Denver PD. I need to verify some patient records for Dr. Patterson. Robert Castellano, date of birth. She looked at me questioningly, and I gave her my information. The conversation lasted about 3 minutes. When she hung up, her expression had changed completely. Mr. Morrison, there's no record of Dr. Patterson ever treating Mr. Castellano. In fact, Dr. Patterson says he's never heard of him. Bradley's face went pale, but he rallied quickly. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Let me try Dr. Chen. Another phone call, another 3-minute conversation, another confirmation that I'd never been a patient. By the time Sergeant Martinez made the third call, Bradley had stopped talking altogether. Mr. Morrison, she said quietly, I'm going to need you to have a seat over there while I sort this out. That's when Sarah walked through the front doors. My daughter looked beautiful, as always, but tired. She was wearing a simple blue dress and sandals, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail like she used to wear when she was little. When she saw me, her face lit up with relief. Dad! Oh my God, I've been so worried. Bradley said you were confused and upset. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Bradley sitting in a chair across the lobby, looking like he wanted to disappear through the floor. What's going on? She asked. Sergeant Martinez gestured for Sarah to join us at the counter. Mrs. Morrison, your husband has presented documents claiming power of attorney over your father, along with medical records showing he's been diagnosed with dementia. We've just discovered that the medical records are fraudulent. Sarah stared at the sergeant for a moment, then turned to look at Bradley. What is she talking about? I watched my daughter's face as Sergeant Martinez explained the situation. Watched confusion turn to disbelief, then to horror, then to a rage I hadn't seen since she was 16 and caught her boyfriend cheating on her. Bradley, she said quietly. What the hell have you done? Bradley stood up and walked over to us, trying to salvage whatever he could. Sarah, baby, let me explain. Explain what? Explain how you forged medical records? Explain how you were trying to steal my father's house? It wasn't like that. I was trying to protect you, protect us. Your father's property portfolio is worth millions, but it's poorly managed. If something happened to him, you'd inherit a mess of tax problems and legal complications. I thought if we could consolidate everything, simplify it. By putting him in a nursing home and stealing his house? By making sure you were financially secure for the rest of your life. The raw emotion in Bradley's voice was the first genuine thing I'd heard from him since he'd walked through my door. But it wasn't love or concern, it was desperation. Sarah stepped back from him like he'd struck her. I never asked you to do any of this. I never wanted any of this. You didn't have to ask. I love you. I wanted to take care of you. By destroying my father? Sergeant Martinez had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Now she stepped between them and addressed Bradley directly. Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you some questions. Did you forge Mr. Castellano's signature on these power of attorney documents? Bradley looked at Sarah, then at me, then back at the sergeant. For a moment I thought he might try to keep lying. Then his shoulders sagged, and 29 years of careful self-control crumbled all at once. Yes, he said quietly. Did you create false medical records to support your claim of Mr. Castellano's mental incompetence? Yes. Did you intend to use these fraudulent documents to gain control of Mr. Castellano's property? Bradley closed his eyes. Yes. Sarah made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. She turned away from her husband and walked to where I was standing. Dad, she whispered, I didn't know. I swear to God I had no idea. I believed her. The devastation in her eyes, the way her hands were shaking, this wasn't an act. My daughter had been used as thoroughly as I had. Sergeant Martinez was already reaching for her handcuffs. Bradley Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted theft by deception. As she read him his Miranda rights, Bradley looked at Sarah one last time. I did it for us, he said. Sarah's response was barely a whisper, but it cut through the lobby like a blade. There is no us anymore. And that's when I realized that Bradley Morrison had lost more than just his freedom and his plan to steal my house. He'd lost the one thing he might have actually cared about. But my story was far from over. 3 hours after Bradley's arrest, Sarah and I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the same silence that had filled the house after Margaret died. But this wasn't the comfortable quiet of shared grief. This was the stunned hush that follows an explosion. Sarah hadn't said much since we left the police station. She'd followed me home in her car, walked through the front door like she was entering a crime scene, and collapsed into her mother's chair at the kitchen table. Now she sat there staring at her hands while I made coffee we probably didn't need. The documents Bradley had brought were spread across the counter where I'd left them, evidence of the most elaborate betrayal either of us had ever experienced. The forged power of attorney looked less convincing now that I knew what it was, but the sheer audacity of the whole plan still took my breath away. How long? Sarah finally asked. How long what? How long was he planning this? I sat down across from her and pushed a mug of coffee in her direction. I don't know. But based on what Detective Morrison told us. I paused, struck by the irony that the detective handling Bradley's case shared his last name. Based on what she said, the medical records were backdated 18 months. So at least that long. Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. That means he was planning this before we got engaged. The devastation in her voice almost broke my heart. This wasn't just about discovering that her husband was a criminal. It was about realizing that their entire relationship had been built on lies. Sarah. He proposed to me 6 months after we met Dad. 6 months. I thought it was romantic, that he just knew I was the one. But he was already planning to steal your house when he got down on one knee. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? I brought him into our lives. I vouched for him. I defended him when you had doubts. You had doubts? She looked up at me for the first time since we'd sat down. You did too. I could see it. The way you watched him, the questions you didn't ask. But I convinced myself you were just being overprotective. We sat there for a moment, both of us processing the same terrible realization. Our instincts had been right, but we'd ignored them to protect each other's feelings. My phone rang, breaking the silence. Detective Morrison's number appeared on the screen. Mr. Castellano? I have some updates on your case. Are you somewhere you can talk? I'm at home with my daughter. Can I put you on speaker? Of course. Mrs. Morrison might want to hear this too. I hit the speaker button and set the phone on the table between us. What did you find out? Quite a bit, actually. We executed a search warrant on your son-in-law's office and apartment. Mr. Castellano, you're not his first victim. Sarah went white. What do you mean? We found files on 3 other elderly property owners in the Denver metro area. All of them widowers with adult children, all of them with significant real estate holdings. Bradley Morrison appears to have been targeting vulnerable older men for at least 2 years. My stomach turned. Did he? Were the others successful? One was. A 74-year-old man named Harold Brennan in Lakewood. Morrison convinced Brennan's daughter to help him gain power of attorney, then transferred ownership of Brennan's duplex to a shell company. Brennan ended up in a state facility, and the daughter moved to California with a very substantial bank account. Sarah made a choking sound. Oh God. The other 2 cases were abandoned when the families became suspicious. But Mr. Castellano, your case was different. More sophisticated. We think Morrison saw your daughter as a long-term investment, not just a short-term accomplice. Meaning what? Meaning he actually married her. In the other cases, he just convinced the children to cooperate. With Sarah, he made it legal. If his plan had worked, he would have had legitimate claim to your assets through marriage. I looked at Sarah, who was staring at the phone like it might bite her. Detective, I said, how did he forge the medical records so convincingly? That's the most disturbing part. Morrison has connections in the medical records industry. We found evidence that he's been paying a data entry clerk at a medical billing company to create false patient files in multiple hospital systems. The records look authentic because they're entered directly into the official databases. Jesus Christ. It gets worse. We also found evidence that Morrison has been using social media and public records to research potential victims. He knew about your wife's death, your daughter's living situation, even your financial difficulties after the cancer bills. He studied your family for months before he ever approached Sarah. Sarah started crying then. Not the quiet tears she'd shed at the police station, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal. I got up and put my arms around her, holding her while she grieved for the marriage that had never really existed. Detective Morrison, I said, what happens now? Bradley Morrison is being held without bail. The district attorney's office is preparing charges for fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. With the evidence we have, he's looking at significant prison time. And the other victims? We're working on that. The Brennan case will probably result in additional charges. The family has been notified, and they're working with an attorney to try to recover some of their losses. After we hung up, Sarah and I sat in silence for a while longer. Eventually, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Anything. Did you ever suspect that Bradley might be capable of something like this? I thought about it carefully before answering. Not this specifically. But I always felt like he was performing, like the person he showed us wasn't real. I thought maybe he was just trying too hard to impress us. I felt it too, she admitted. Especially toward the end. Like he was always watching me, calculating something. I told myself it was wedding stress. Why didn't you say anything? Because I loved him. Or I loved who I thought he was. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I brought him into our home. I'm sorry I defended him. I'm sorry I almost let him destroy everything you and Mom built. Sarah, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Bradley Morrison is a predator who spent months learning how to manipulate both of us. He's good at what he does. That's why he was able to fool so many people. But I married him. You married the person he pretended to be. The person he wanted you to see. That's not the same thing. She nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. It would take time for her to forgive herself, just like it would take time for both of us to trust our judgment again. My phone rang again. This time it was my attorney, James Hoffman, returning the call I'd made from the police station. Bob, what the hell is going on? Your message said something about fraud and a forged power of attorney? I gave him the condensed version of the day's events. When I finished, there was a long pause. Jesus, Bob. Are you okay? Is Sarah okay? We're surviving. What do we need to do legally? First, we need to make sure none of Bradley's fraudulent documents can be used against you. I'll file paperwork tomorrow to have the power of attorney officially voided. Second, we need to audit all your accounts and property records to make sure he didn't do any other damage while he had access to your information. What kind of damage? Credit applications, loan documents, property transfers, anything that might have required your signature. I'll also recommend a forensic accountant to go through your finances with a fine-tooth comb. The scope of what Bradley might have done was starting to sink in. It wasn't just about the house, it was about everything. Every document he'd seen, every conversation he'd overheard, every piece of personal information he'd gathered over the past year. James, how bad could this be? Honestly? I don't know. But Bob, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Bradley Morrison's crimes against your family go deeper than what you discovered today. As it turned out, James was right. But I was about to discover that the deepest betrayal was yet to come. The forensic accountant James recommended was a woman named Patricia Webb, and she had the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She arrived at my house the following Wednesday morning with 2 laptops, a briefcase full of financial documents, and the unsettling ability to spot fraud from across a room. Sarah had gone back to work, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while her world crumbled around her. She'd moved back into her old apartment the day after Bradley's arrest, unable to bear staying in the house where she'd planned a future with a man who never existed. Patricia spread her equipment across my dining room table and immediately went to work. She'd already pulled credit reports, bank statements, and property records for the past 2 years, creating a timeline of every financial transaction connected to my name. Mr. Castellano, she said after about an hour of reviewing documents. When did you last check your credit report? I don't know. Maybe 2 years ago. Why? She turned her laptop screen toward me, displaying a credit report that made my blood run cold. According to Experian, I had 7 credit cards I'd never applied for, 3 outstanding loans I'd never taken, and a credit line against my house that I'd never authorized. The total debt attributed to my name was just over $200,000. This can't be right, I said. Unfortunately, it is. All of these accounts were opened using your social security number and forged documents. The signatures on the applications match the same handwriting pattern we saw on the power of attorney. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. How is this possible? Wouldn't the banks have called me? Wouldn't I have received statements? Patricia pulled up another document. That's the clever part. All of the account statements were sent to a P.O. box in Aurora that was rented under your name. Bradley Morrison had a key. The methodical nature of it was staggering. Bradley hadn't just planned to steal my house, he'd been systematically destroying my financial life for months, building up debt in my name while positioning himself to take control of my assets. There's more, Patricia said. The equity line against your house was used to make payments on some of these fraudulent accounts. Essentially, he was using your own money to maintain the illusion that you were managing multiple debts. How much did he steal? So far, I've identified $137,000 in unauthorized withdrawals and charges. But I'm not done yet. My phone rang. Detective Morrison again. Mr. Castellano, we need you and Sarah to come down to the station. There's been a development in Bradley's case. What kind of development? I'd rather discuss it in person. Can you be here in an hour? I looked at Patricia, who was still scrolling through financial records with increasing concern. Detective, I'm in the middle of discovering how deep Bradley's fraud goes. Can this wait? Actually, it's related to that. We've been analyzing Bradley's computer files, and we've found some things you need to see. An hour later, Sarah and I sat in Detective Morrison's office, facing a computer screen that would change everything we thought we knew about Bradley Morrison's crimes. Before I show you this, the detective said, I want you to understand that what you're about to see is going to be difficult. Bradley Morrison kept detailed records of his activities, including his relationship with Sarah. She clicked on a folder labeled Castellano Project and opened a document that looked like a business plan. Target: Robert James Castellano, DOB March 15, 1962. Estimated net worth: $4.2 million. Primary assets: residential property, 2.1 M, rental properties, 1.8 M, business equity, $300K. Vulnerabilities: recent widower, isolated, single heir with financial struggles. Timeline: 18 to 24 months. Approach: romantic relationship with heir, establish trust, gain legal control. Sarah made a strangled sound. He wrote a business plan to steal from us? Detective Morrison scrolled down to reveal more detailed notes. Phase 1, months 1 to 6, establish relationship with Sarah Castellano, assess family dynamics, catalog assets. Phase 2, months 7 to 12, integrate into family structure, gain access to financial information, identify legal vulnerabilities. Phase 3, months 13 to 18, marriage proposal and wedding, establish legal relationship, begin document fraud. Phase 4, months 19 to 24, execute transfer of assets, placement in care facility, liquidation of holdings. But the worst part wasn't the cold calculation of the plan, it was the personal observations Bradley had made about both of us. Subject shows typical grief patterns following spouse's death, depression, isolation, need for family connection. Daughter displays guilt about mother's death and father's loneliness, making her susceptible to pressure regarding father's care needs. Both subjects demonstrate middle-class trust patterns and limited experience with sophisticated fraud. Sarah stood up abruptly and walked to the window. He studied us like lab rats. There's more, Detective Morrison said quietly. We found audio recordings. What kind of audio recordings? Bradley was recording conversations in your home. We've found over 40 hours of audio files from the past 8 months. The violation was so profound I couldn't speak. This man had sat at my dinner table, slept under my roof, and recorded my most private conversations with my daughter. We're still analyzing the recordings, the detective continued, but it's clear he was gathering information about your assets, your routines, and your relationship with Sarah. He even recorded conversations about your wife's medical expenses and insurance settlements. I found my voice. How? Small recording devices hidden in common areas. Living room, kitchen, study. He was particularly interested in conversations about your business and estate planning. Sarah turned back from the window, her face pale but determined. Detective, can I hear some of these recordings? Sarah, I don't think. I started. No, Dad. I need to know. I need to hear how he talked about us when he thought no one was listening. Detective Morrison looked uncertain. Mrs. Morrison, some of these recordings are intimate. Between you and Bradley. Are you sure you want to expose yourself to that? Play them. She clicked on an audio file dated 2 months before the wedding. Bradley's voice filled the room, talking on his phone to someone I didn't recognize. The old man's getting suspicious, but Sarah keeps defending me. She's completely hooked. The wedding is the key. Once we're married, I have legal standing to challenge any claims of fraud. Even if he figures out what's happening, it'll look like a family dispute rather than criminal activity. The other voice, a woman, responded. What if she finds out? She won't. She's too emotionally invested. And even if she does, by then it'll be too late. The paperwork will be filed, the house will be in my name, and Daddy will be locked up in a memory care facility where his word won't mean shit. They both laughed. Sarah doubled over like she'd been punched in the stomach. Oh God. Oh God, he's talking about me like I'm part of the con. But there was more. Detective Morrison played another recording, this one from just a week before the wedding. Bradley's voice again, this time talking to the same woman. I've got everything in place. The forged medical records are in the system, the power of attorney is perfect, and I've already identified a buyer for the house. Sarah thinks we're going to live there after the honeymoon, but I'm planning to have the old man committed within a week of getting back. What about Sarah? What about her? Once I have control of the estate, I don't need her anymore. I'll give her enough money to keep quiet and file for divorce in 6 months. She'll be so devastated about her father's condition that she'll probably be grateful for the settlement. The room fell silent except for the sound of Sarah crying. Not the grief tears from earlier, but something harder, angrier. He never loved me, she said. Not even a little bit. Sarah, I started. No, Dad. Listen to him. I was just a tool. A way to get close to you. Everything, the proposal, the wedding, the honeymoon, it was all fake. Detective Morrison stopped the recording. I'm sorry you had to hear that. But there's something else you need to know. What? The woman on the recordings? We've identified her. Her name is Amanda Chun, and she's Bradley's actual girlfriend. They'd been together for 3 years. The final piece of Bradley Morrison's deception fell into place. Not only had he married my daughter to steal my property, he'd betrayed her with another woman the entire time. Sarah looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, concentrated rage. Dad, she said quietly, I want him destroyed. And that's when I realized my daughter and I were about to become partners in something I'd never imagined I'd be capable of. Revenge. If you've ever had someone tear apart everything you love, everything you've built, everything you believe in, then you know exactly what Sarah and I felt sitting in that police station. Rage doesn't even begin to cover it. It was something deeper, something primal, the kind of fury that makes you understand why people used to settle disputes with pistols at dawn. Bradley Morrison had stolen more than money. He'd stolen trust, love, hope, and the future my daughter had dreamed of. He'd turned our grief over Margaret into a weapon against us. And he'd done it all while laughing about how easy we were to manipulate. But here's what Bradley didn't understand about the Castellano family. We don't just get mad. We get even. Detective Morrison could see the change in both of us. Folks, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I need you to let the justice system handle this. The justice system? Sarah's voice was ice cold. Detective, how long will Bradley serve for what he did to us? With the evidence we have, probably 5 to 8 years. 5 to 8 years, Sarah repeated. For destroying our lives, for stealing everything my father worked for making me fall in love with a lie. 5 to 8 years. It's a significant sentence. It's nothing. Sarah stood up and looked at me. Dad, we need to talk. Privately. We left the police station and drove to a diner on Colfax Avenue, the kind of place where you can sit in a corner booth and plan the rest of your life over coffee and pie. Sarah ordered nothing. I got coffee I didn't want and waited for my daughter to tell me what we were going to do. I want him broke, she said finally. I want him humiliated. I want him to lose everything, just like he tried to do to us. Sarah, the legal system will. The legal system will give him 3 hots and a cot for a few years, and then he'll get out and do this to someone else's family. That's not enough. I studied my daughter's face. The soft, trusting young woman who'd brought Bradley home for dinner was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd learned that the world could be cruel and unfair, and who'd decided to be cruel and unfair right back. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we know everything about Bradley Morrison's operation. We know his methods, his contacts, his resources. We know about Amanda Chin. We know about the other victims. And we know things he doesn't know we know. She was right. In trying to destroy us, Bradley had given us a complete blueprint of his criminal enterprise. Keep talking. Patricia found $137,000 that he stole from you, right? But that's just what she's found so far. What if there's more? What if we could prove he's stolen from dozens of people over the years? Even if we could, the statute of limitations. Not criminal charges, Dad. Civil suits. Wrongful death claims. Elder abuse lawsuits. The kind of litigation that follows you forever and costs more to defend than most people make in a lifetime. I was beginning to see where she was going with this. You want to destroy him financially. I want to destroy him completely. Financially, professionally, personally. I want Bradley Morrison to spend the rest of his life paying for what he did to our family. That could take years. It could cost us everything we have left. Sarah leaned across the table and grabbed my hand. Dad, he was going to put you in a memory care facility and steal everything Mom and you built together. He was going to make me watch you disappear into some warehouse for old people while he sold off 42 years of your work. And then he was going to divorce me and disappear. She was right, and we both knew it. Bradley Morrison had declared war on our family. We hadn't started this fight, but we were damn well going to finish it. Okay, I said. What do you need from me? Sarah smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like her mother. I need you to trust me. And I need you to be patient. Because what I'm planning is going to take time. Over the next 2 weeks, while Bradley sat in county jail awaiting trial, Sarah and I began building our case. Not the criminal case. That was the district attorney's job. Our case was going to be much more comprehensive. Sarah had taken leave from her job and thrown herself into research with the obsessive focus she'd inherited from Margaret. She spent 12 hours a day on the computer, tracking down Bradley's history, his associates, his victims, and his assets. What she found was staggering. Bradley Morrison had been running variations of his eldercare scam for over 5 years. The Harold Brennan case in Lakewood was just the tip of the iceberg. Sarah found evidence of at least 12 other cases across Colorado, Wyoming, and Kansas, with combined losses well over $1 million. But more importantly, she found Amanda Chin. Amanda wasn't just Bradley's girlfriend, she was his business partner. She worked for a medical records company called Health Tech Solutions, and she'd been the one creating the false patient files that made Bradley's scams possible. She'd also been managing the financial side of their operation, moving stolen money through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Dad, Sarah said one evening as we sat in my study going through boxes of financial records, I think I know how we can get them both. How? Amanda Chin thinks she's safe because she's not officially part of Bradley's current case. The police haven't connected her to the medical records fraud yet. But I have. She showed me a series of emails she recovered from Bradley's computer files, correspondence between Bradley and Amanda discussing not just my case, but half a dozen others. Detailed instructions on creating false medical records, strategies for manipulating family members, even celebration messages when they'd successfully transferred property or gained access to bank accounts. This is enough to charge her as a co-conspirator in multiple felony cases, I said. Better than that. This is enough to sue her personally for civil conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. And unlike Bradley, Amanda Chin has assets. Sarah had done her homework. Amanda owned a condo in Cherry Creek, drove a Mercedes, and had investment accounts worth over $400,000. She also had a professional license that could be revoked if she was found guilty of criminal activity. But here's the best part, Sarah continued. Amanda doesn't know that we know about her. She thinks she's in the clear. So what's the plan? Sarah's smile was absolutely predatory. We're going to give her a choice. She can cooperate with us in destroying Bradley's operation and make full restitution to all of his victims, or we're going to destroy her too. And if she refuses? Then we destroy her anyway. But Dad, I don't think she'll refuse. I think when Amanda Chin realizes that we can prove she's been stealing from elderly people for 5 years, she's going to be very interested in making a deal. The plan Sarah had developed was elegant in its simplicity. We were going to use Bradley's own methods against him, and against everyone who'd helped him. But first, we needed to have a conversation with Amanda Chin. And Sarah had already figured out exactly where to find her. Amanda Chin worked out at an upscale fitness center in Cherry Creek, the kind of place where personal trainers cost more per hour than most people make in a day. Sarah had been watching her routine for 3 days, learning her schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. On Thursday morning, while Amanda was finishing her yoga class, Sarah was waiting by her Mercedes in the parking lot. I was there too, sitting in my truck 50 feet away with a clear view of both women. Sarah had insisted on handling the initial approach alone, but I wasn't about to let my daughter confront Bradley's accomplice without backup. Amanda Chin was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'4" with short black hair and the kind of expensive workout clothes that cost more than most people's rent. She looked successful, confident, completely unaware that her world was about to implode. Sarah stepped into her path as she approached her car. Amanda? Amanda Chan? Amanda looked confused but not alarmed. Yes? Do I know you? My name is Sarah Morrison. I think you know my husband. The change in Amanda's expression was immediate and dramatic. Fear flickered across her features, followed quickly by calculation. She glanced around the parking lot, probably looking for escape routes. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Sarah pulled out her phone and played one of the audio recordings we'd gotten from Detective Morrison. Bradley's voice filled the space between them. Sarah thinks we're going to live there after the honeymoon, but I'm planning to have the old man committed within a week of getting back. Amanda's voice responded. What about Sarah? What about her? Once I have control of the estate, I don't need her anymore. Sarah stopped the recording and looked at Amanda with the kind of calm that comes before a hurricane. We need to talk, Sarah said. 10 minutes later, the three of us sat at a table in a coffee shop near the gym. Amanda looked like she wanted to run, but she was smart enough to know that running would only make things worse. Sarah laid it out for her systematically, methodically, with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. We know about Health Tech Solutions. We know you've been creating false medical records for Bradley's scams for over 5 years. We know about the Harold Brennan case, the Morrison case in Thornton, the Patterson case in Lakewood. We know about the shell companies, the offshore accounts, and the money laundering. Amanda's face had gone white. You can't prove any of that. Sarah opened a folder and spread out photocopies of the emails, bank records, and financial documents she'd compiled. Actually, we can prove all of it. The question is what you're going to do about it. What do you want? I want you to help us destroy Bradley Morrison's entire operation. I want you to provide evidence against every person who helped him steal from elderly victims. And I want you to make full restitution to every family he's hurt. Amanda stared at the documents in front of her. That would cost me everything I have. Less than you're going to lose when we turn this evidence over to the FBI, I said. It was the first time I'd spoken since we'd sat down, and Amanda seemed to notice me for the first time. Who are you? I'm Robert Castellano. Bradley tried to steal my house and put me in a memory care facility. You helped him forge the medical records. Amanda closed her eyes. Oh God. Here's how this works, Sarah continued. You have 48 hours to decide whether you want to cooperate with us or whether you want to face federal racketeering charges. If you cooperate, we'll work out a payment plan for restitution, and you'll testify against Bradley and anyone else involved in these scams. If you don't cooperate, we go to the FBI tomorrow morning, and you can explain to a federal judge why you've been defrauding elderly people for the better part of a decade. And if I cooperate? You keep your freedom, you keep your professional license, and you help us make sure Bradley Morrison never hurts another family. Amanda looked back and forth between us, probably trying to figure out if we were bluffing. We weren't. I need time to think about this. 48 hours, Sarah repeated. We'll be in touch. As we walked back to our cars, Amanda called after us. "Wait. I have a question." Sarah turned around. "What? How did you find all this? How did you connect me to Bradley's cases?" Sarah's smile was cold. "The same way Bradley researched his victims. I studied you. I learned your routines, your vulnerabilities, your connections. I spent 2 weeks becoming an expert on Amanda Chin, just like Bradley spent months becoming an expert on my family. That's—" Amanda struggled for words. "That's terrifying. Now you know how it feels." 2 days later, Amanda called Sarah's number. "I'll do it," she said without preamble. "I'll cooperate." "Smart choice. Meet us at my attorney's office tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. James Hoffman had been dubious about our plan when Sarah first explained it, but when he saw the evidence we'd compiled, his skepticism turned to amazement. "Jesus Christ, Sarah! This is better than anything the prosecutor has. You've built a federal racketeering case." Amanda showed up at his office looking like she hadn't slept in a week. She'd brought her own attorney, a nervous-looking man who kept checking his watch and glancing at the door like he wanted to flee. The negotiation took 4 hours. In the end, Amanda agreed to 1. Provide complete testimony against Bradley Morrison and any other co-conspirators. 2. Turn over all records related to the medical fraud scheme. 3. Identify every victim of Bradley's scams over the past 5 years. 4. Make restitution of $347,000 to identified victims. 5. Surrender her professional license and never work in healthcare again. In exchange, we agreed not to pursue federal charges against her personally, though we couldn't control what prosecutors might do once they had her testimony. Amanda's attorney wasn't happy with the deal. "Ms. Chin, you're essentially confessing to multiple felonies and bankrupting yourself in the process. The alternative is spending the next decade in federal prison," Amanda replied. "I'll take bankruptcy." After Amanda and her attorney left, James looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. "Where did you learn to negotiate like that?" "I spent a year watching Bradley Morrison manipulate people," Sarah said. "I'm a quick learner." But Amanda's cooperation was just the beginning of our plan. Armed with her testimony and records, we now had the ammunition to go after Bradley's entire network of accomplices and victims. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah contacted every family Amanda had identified as victims of Bradley's scams. Some were skeptical, some were grateful, and some were so damaged by what had happened to them that they could barely function. But all of them wanted justice. Harold Brennan's family agreed to file a civil suit for wrongful institutionalization and elder abuse. The Patterson family in Lakewood filed for fraud and conspiracy. 2 families in Wyoming and 1 in Kansas joined a class action lawsuit that named not just Bradley, but also HealthTech Solutions, the medical billing company where Amanda worked, and 3 other co-conspirators we'd identified. By the time Bradley Morrison went to trial for his crimes against my family, he was facing 17 separate civil lawsuits with combined damages exceeding $3 million. But that wasn't enough for Sarah. She wanted to destroy him personally, not just financially. And she'd figured out exactly how to do it. Bradley Morrison's criminal trial began on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 4 months after his arrest. The courthouse was packed, not just with his victims and their families, but with reporters who'd gotten wind of the story. A charming young man who'd married his way into a family just to destroy them made for compelling television. Sarah and I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table. Bradley was at the defendant's table 20 feet away, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, looking nothing like the confident man who knocked on my door with a notary and a briefcase full of forged documents. He'd lost weight in jail. His hair was longer, greasier, and his skin had the pale, unhealthy look of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in months. When he turned to scan the courtroom, his eyes found Sarah immediately. The look that passed between them was electric. Sarah stared at her husband with undisguised hatred, and Bradley stared back with something that might have been regret or might have been calculation. With him, it was impossible to tell. The trial itself was almost anticlimactic. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses were credible, and Bradley's defense attorney, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, couldn't mount any kind of meaningful challenge to the prosecution's case. Amanda Chen testified for 3 hours, detailing the entire scope of Bradley's fraud operation. She was calm, professional, and utterly damning. She described how Bradley had recruited her, how they'd perfected their system of creating false medical records, and how they'd celebrated each successful theft with expensive dinners and weekend getaways. When the prosecutor asked her to describe Bradley's attitude toward his victims, Amanda's voice barely wavered. He called them marks. He said elderly people were perfect targets because they were isolated, trusting, and their families were usually too busy or too guilty to ask hard questions. He particularly enjoyed cases where he could manipulate the children into cooperating. He said it made the victims feel even more betrayed. Detective Morrison testified about the audio recordings, the forged documents, and the systematic nature of Bradley's crimes. Patricia Webb, the forensic accountant, walked the jury through the financial fraud in excruciating detail. And then Sarah took the stand. She'd insisted on testifying, despite the prosecutor's concerns that it might be too emotionally difficult. But Sarah was determined to look at Bradley one more time and tell the world exactly what he'd done to our family. She was magnificent. Calm, articulate, devastating. She described falling in love with a man who never existed, planning a future with someone who was already planning to destroy her family, and discovering that her entire marriage had been a business transaction. Bradley Morrison didn't just steal money, she told the jury. He stole trust. He stole love. He stole the memory of my mother by using our grief as a weapon against us. He took the most sacred thing in the world, marriage, and turned it into a tool of fraud. When the defense attorney cross-examined her, trying to suggest that she'd been willfully blind to Bradley's true nature, Sarah's response was perfect. Sir, when someone you love lies to you with professional skill for months at a time, when they study you like a textbook and craft their deception specifically to exploit your vulnerabilities, that's not willful blindness. That's being the victim of a predator. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing 3 weeks later, Bradley got 12 years in federal prison, longer than anyone had expected, thanks in large part to the testimony about his other victims and the systematic nature of his crimes. But for Sarah, the criminal conviction was just the beginning. While Bradley was being processed into the federal correctional system, our civil attorneys were systematically dismantling his life. The lawsuits Sarah had orchestrated were devastating in their scope and precision. Bradley's assets, what little he had, were seized to pay restitution. His professional licenses were revoked. His credit was destroyed. His reputation was annihilated. Every news story about his crimes mentioned his name, his methods, and his victims. But Sarah's masterstroke was personal. She'd kept in touch with Amanda Chen throughout the trial, not out of friendship but out of strategic necessity. Amanda had information Sarah needed, information about Bradley's life before he targeted our family. It turned out Bradley Morrison wasn't even Bradley Morrison. His real name was Brian Morris, and he'd been running cons under various identities for over a decade. He'd abandoned wives in 2 different states, left children he'd never supported, and destroyed families from California to Florida. Sarah tracked down every one of them. She found Jennifer Morris in Sacramento, who'd been married to Brad Martinelli for 2 years before he'd emptied their joint bank account and disappeared. She found Lisa Morrison in Phoenix, who'd given birth to Bradley's son and hadn't heard from him since the child was 6 months old. She found Patricia Martinez in Tampa, who'd lost her house and her savings to Bradley Matthews 3 years earlier. Sarah organized them. She helped them file lawsuits. She connected them with attorneys. She created a network of Bradley Morrison's victims that stretched across the country and represented over a decade of fraud, theft, and abandoned families. By the time Sarah was finished, Bradley Morrison faced civil judgments totaling more than $4 million and child support obligations for 3 different children in 3 different states. Even if he served his full 12-year sentence and got out with perfect behavior, he'd spend the rest of his life paying for what he'd done. Every paycheck he ever earned would be garnished. Every asset he ever acquired would be seized. Every attempt he made to rebuild his life would be crushed by the legal machinery Sarah had constructed around him. On the day Bradley was sentenced, Sarah and I stood outside the courthouse while reporters asked questions about our experience and our plans for the future. "Mrs. Morrison," one reporter asked, "do you feel justice has been served?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "Justice isn't just about punishment," she said. "It's about consequences. Bradley Morrison spent years studying how to destroy families, how to steal from elderly people, how to manipulate trust and love into weapons. Now he's going to spend the rest of his life learning what it feels like to be on the receiving end. Do you have any message for other families who might be facing similar situations?" "Yes. Don't trust blindly, but don't live in fear either. And if someone does betray you, if they do try to destroy everything you've built, remember that you have more power than you think. Sometimes the best revenge is simply showing the world who they really are." As we walked away from the courthouse, I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders. "Are you done now?" I asked. "Is it over?" Sarah smiled, the first genuinely happy smile I'd seen from her since Bradley's arrest. "It's over, Dad. We won." And for the first time in months, I believed her. 2 years have passed since Bradley Morrison was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. 2 years since my daughter and I learned that revenge, when properly executed, isn't just about punishment, it's about justice, restoration, and the kind of closure that lets you sleep at night. I'm sitting in my study now, the same room where Bradley once asked for my blessing to marry my daughter, the same room where he probably recorded dozens of our private conversations. But the anger that lived here for so long has finally faded, replaced by something more valuable: peace. The house is quiet tonight. Sarah moved back in 6 months ago, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. We've both discovered that healing sometimes means reclaiming the spaces that were stolen from you, filling them with new memories that can coexist with the old ones. The legal aftermath of Bradley's crimes continued long after his sentencing. The civil lawsuits Sarah orchestrated resulted in the largest elder fraud settlement in Colorado history, over $2 million distributed among Bradley's victims across 5 states. The medical billing company where Amanda Chen worked was shut down, and its executives faced federal charges. 3 other accomplices were arrested and convicted. But beyond the legal victories, something more important happened. The families Bradley had destroyed began to rebuild. Harold Brennan, the elderly man in Lakewood who'd been institutionalized through Bradley's scheme, was reunited with his family and moved to a senior community of his choice. His daughter used her share of the settlement to establish a foundation that helps elderly people avoid financial fraud. Jennifer Morris, the wife Bradley had abandoned in Sacramento, used her lawsuit settlement to finish her nursing degree and now works with elder abuse prevention programs. Lisa Morrison in Phoenix got child support that helped her provide for the son Bradley had never acknowledged. The network Sarah built to pursue justice became a support system for healing. Amanda Chen kept her end of our bargain. She provided testimony in every case, surrendered her professional license, and made full restitution. The last time I saw her was at a victims' rights conference where she was speaking about how financial fraud operations recruit accomplices. She'd found a different kind of redemption, using her experience to prevent others from making her mistakes. But the most important healing happened right here, between Sarah and me. My daughter never remarried, though she's been dating a genuinely good man named Thomas for the past year. He's a teacher, patient and kind, and he knows the whole story about Bradley without judgment or fear. Sarah took her time learning to trust again, but she's getting there. As for me, I've discovered that surviving betrayal can make you stronger if you let it. I'm more careful now, more protective of my vulnerabilities, but I'm not afraid to live. I still invest in properties, though I work with attorneys who document everything. I still welcome Sarah's friends into my home, though I pay attention to warning signs I might have missed before. And I still miss Margaret every day, but I've learned that grief and joy can occupy the same space. She would have been proud of how Sarah and I fought back against Bradley's betrayal. She would have loved seeing her daughter become the kind of woman who refuses to be victimized. The financial recovery took longer than the legal battles. Patricia Webb, the forensic accountant, worked for 14 months to untangle Bradley's fraud and recover what could be recovered. In the end, we got back about 60% of what he'd stolen directly, plus the satisfaction of knowing he'd never benefit from any of it. More importantly, we learned to be smarter about protecting ourselves. I've established trust that can't be manipulated by power of attorney fraud. Sarah and I both have separate attorneys who don't know each other, ensuring that no single person can ever gain control of our entire legal situation. We've created backup systems for our backup systems. Bradley Morrison turned our trust into a weapon against us, but in doing so, he taught us to be stronger, smarter, and more resilient than we'd ever been before. Last month, I received a letter from the Federal Correctional Institution where Bradley is serving his sentence. It was from him, addressed to me personally, asking for forgiveness and claiming he'd found religion in prison. The letter was 6 pages long, filled with apologies and explanations and requests for understanding. I read it once, then burned it in the fireplace. Sarah asked me later if I felt any satisfaction from his obvious desperation, any vindication from knowing that our campaign had worked exactly as she'd planned. No, I told her. I don't feel anything about Bradley Morrison anymore. That's how I know we've won. Because that's the thing about revenge, real revenge, when it's done right. It's not about hatred or anger or the desire to cause pain. It's about justice, consequences, and the restoration of balance. It's about making sure that people who prey on others face the full weight of their choices. Bradley Morrison spent months studying our family, learning our vulnerabilities, exploiting our love and trust to steal everything we built. Sarah and I spent months studying him, learning his methods, exploiting his arrogance and greed to destroy everything he'd built. The difference is that we were defending ourselves and protecting others. He was just a predator who got outplayed by his intended victims. Sarah keeps a folder in her desk with newspaper clippings about Bradley's conviction, updates on the other victims, and thank you letters from families who were helped by the foundation we established with part of the settlement money. She doesn't look at it often, but she says it reminds her that good people can fight back against bad people and win. I have my own reminders. The house is still here, still ours, still filled with memories of Margaret and hopes for the future. My business continues to thrive. My relationship with Sarah is stronger than it's ever been. And every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own home, I remember that there was a time when Bradley Morrison planned to take all of this away from me. He failed. If you've stuck with me through this entire story, if you've listened to every detail of how a family can be targeted, manipulated, and nearly destroyed by someone they trusted, then you understand why I wanted to share it. Because what happened to us could happen to anyone. Predators like Bradley Morrison are out there right now, studying their next victims, perfecting their methods, preparing to destroy lives for profit. But you also understand that we have more power than we think. That evil people can be stopped by good people who refuse to be victims. That sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to fight back so hard that the predator never recovers. Sarah and I didn't just survive Bradley Morrison's betrayal. We turned it into a force for justice that protected dozens of other families and will continue protecting them for years to come. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been betrayed or know someone who has, share it. Let people know that they don't have to accept being victimized. Let them know that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be broken. Hit that like button if you believe that good people deserve to win. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about justice, family, and the power of fighting back against those who would destroy us. And remember, trust carefully, love deeply, but never forget that you're stronger than anyone who tries to take advantage of you. My name is Robert Castellano, and this is the story of how my son-in-law tried to steal my house and destroy my family. It's also the story of how we destroyed him instead. And I sleep just fine at night.